Whatever freeloading the right says is happening on account of undocumented migrants pales in comparison to the amount of money that corporations and the wealthy get to steal.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So friend of the show, Maximilian Alvarez, was on the Hills Rising last week in what, from what I can gather, and Max is in the chat, just waiting to be complimented. So if you have if you've got a correction, then feel free to offer it. But from what I can gather, this was just supposed to be a conversation about the pros and cons of California's new healthcare plan and rebates to Californians. It did not seem like, from Max's reaction, that this was supposed to be about undocumented immigrants, but that's what it turned into. And the conservative Newsweek contributor that Max was on the panel with opened first when asked about, like, do you support these things from California, saying, I'd have to look into it. When asked if she would support it, which, like, did she not know that she was going to be talking about that? You know, like, usually on these shows you get a sort of, you know, like, okay, this is what you're going to be talking about. And so the first thing out of her mouth was like, I'll have to look into it. And that was just very odd to me. But she did that before immediately pointing the finger at undocumented immigrants. So let's take a listen to what she opened with.
Okay, let me find the clip marked weirdo. Yes, there we go.
I'm not opposed to states using their excess funds to actually support and undergird the citizens, considering in general and considering the times we are in right now. I'm curious about the extent to which these funds will be provided to undocumented migrants and illegal aliens, and the impact that could have on citizens and taxpayers overall.
Can we acknowledge for a second, like, the weird psychology that you've got to have for the first thing that you think of when you hear folks in California are going to get some relief from inflation? Literally, the first thing on your mind is, I hope them damn illegals don't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, that is a weird psychology, right? That's a weird thing to think.
It's very American.
So Max points this out, saying, you know, that if we want to be concerned about freeloading, despite all of the evidence that we've got that undocumented folks do contribute to society, that they do pay taxes, they build our infrastructure, they provide, they do necessary labor on farms, all of these things, you know, despite all the evidence that we've got that they do contribute to society, that even if we stipulate that they don't, like on a net, they're a drain, like even let's just stipulate that, there are better places to look if we want to, you know, stop some holes, you know, in the bathtub, so to speak. Let's listen to how he responded.
Two things that I would say. One, I don't know how this quickly became a conversation about, illegal immigration. All I would say is that, you know, what I think defines, you know, like me more as a leftist is that I am always looking to punch up, not punch down. Punching down at illegal immigrants, undocumented folks, is a tried and tested method to get working people to see one another as the enemy instead of looking at the very obvious bandits who are ripping us off. Whatever, you know, you are saying, like whatever freeloading the right says is happening on account of undocumented migrants pales in comparison to the amount of money that corporations and the wealthy get to steal from the public coffers and stash in their pockets. It's not even close. So unless we're talking about that, the whole, like, you know, oh, is this going to go to undocumented folks is an absolute BS point. Also, undocumented folks pay taxes. So let's shut up about that crap.
Now,
I love it.
Love it.
Way to
now,
go, Max.
In the interest of fairness, though, the Newsweek contributor had a pretty compelling rebuttal. Let's play that.
Let's keep our eye on the ball. Secondly,
No, we won't.
Would say, well, you're wrong. You're making a dumb, bad argument. That's what I would say to any working person who's watching here. They're trying to distract you from the people who are actually
for the left.
So, like I said, pretty compelling. calling him hysterical, and
that's not an adjective I would ever use on Max. Listen to a lot of Max's stuff and read his stuff. Hysterical is not a word I would ever come up with.
No, it's not. A very strange rebuttal. She does go on to say that basically, look, even if rich folks are taking more, undocumented people don't deserve anything. Like, just by the fact that they're undocumented, they shouldn't be getting anything from us, even if rich people take more, which she doesn't even dispute. And
as if, citizenship status, a piece of paper with a country's flag on it, determines your value as a human being.
And as if all of this stuff is immutable and natural. Like, that's just the way that it is. We choose to make these people undocumented. We could easily give them the documents and give them the rights so that they are not as easily exploited. But she doesn't want to do that. She wants to demonize them. So this is how Max responds to her saying that, look, even if rich folks are taking more, undocumented people don't deserve anything, and we should take everything from them. This is how he responds.
Max, what do you say to this argument? Because I've heard some leftists talk about this. There are debates about the extent to which immigration, undocumented or otherwise, has a negative effect on the American worker, but the most credible argument to that end is that there is at the very bottom tier of the American workforce, people who are very marginal and represents a very small fraction of American workers, there is a somewhat of a negative effect caused by undocumented immigrants. Do you think, as a left party, a working class movement, you have to at least acknowledge and have a conversation about that, even if your response to that reality wouldn't be to have draconian immigration policy? It might be, I don't know, a different kind of distributive policy. I mean, do you think that the left does itself a disservice by not acknowledging that reality, or at least that perception?
Yeah, I mean, for any issue, if we are pretending it doesn't exist, we are not being, honest and trying to actually come to solutions. Here's what I would say to everyone listening. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to anyone on this panel. As I've been saying since I started my podcast years ago, listen to the workers. I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of them. You can go hear their thoughts on this, on my podcast, on The Real News, in my book, right? And what work, the thing I would say is it's actually not that hard. Working people are smart. They're not dumb. They know how the bosses pit working people against one another, either by unionized workers against non-unionized workers, citizens against non-citizens, black workers against white workers, right? They have been dividing and conquering us for as long as this country has existed, and even before that. And here's the hopeful thing, is that if you have the honest conversation that we're talking about having here, which it is wrong to presume that people aren't having that, labor's been having this conversation for a long time. Mm-hmm. And if you actually look at unions like Labor's Local 79 in New York, they are showing the path forward. They are unionized citizen workers who are currently standing up for undocumented workers who are being exploited and taken advantage of by union busting contractors in the city. They are going to bat for them. They even created a fund to make sure that undocumented workers could recoup, benefits that the rest of us were able to during the pandemic, but undocumented workers were not, because they know when the business class and right-wing and liberal politicians who champion them target immigration as the issue hurting workers and suppressing wages. Working people know that what that means is that they do not want to stop illegal immigration. They want to enshrine a permanent class, a permanent underclass of undocumented workers that they can constantly exploit. If you look at the data, if you look at the research, that is what happens. Even under Trump's regime, they did not really push out the 10 million plus undocumented workers who are already here. They just made it harder for those workers to speak up on the job. They made it easier for bosses to exploit them, and they made it easier for companies and businesses to undercut other workers by relying on undocumented workers. So there is a left argument to this. It's being had. Look to the workers, look to organized labor. They're providing the path forward. It is not our job to punch down and blame the ways the ruling class is ripping all of us off on undocumented workers who are just trying to get by like the rest of us. I have no patience for that.
Be here.
Here, Max really goes methodically through the arguments that conservative pundits have against solidarity with undocumented immigrants. Can the presence of undocumented workers harm documented workers? Like, of course it can. The effect is marginal. From any kind of research that's been done into this, it shows that the effect is generally pretty marginal. But there are better ways to rectify that, namely by giving them rights and helping them to organize. He also points out that labor has been in this conversation for a long time, and labor has actually moved pretty significantly. 100 years ago, it was very anti-immigrant. Through struggle, through conversations with other undocumented workers, debates in union halls, labor has come to the position that doing the boss's job, attacking other working people, is not good for us. It's not a good use of our energy. The best use of our energy is building solidarity, building communion, building community to be able to fight the boss. That's what labor has. This is the position that labor has come to basically globally. Across the world, this is the position of organized labor, as opposed to a reactionary anti-immigrant position, because we've seen the reality of how it affects working people. He also points out how actually having undocumented immigrants is beneficial for bosses like Trump, which is why folks like that will stoke division and resentment without actually offering any solution, without actually moving forward or moving forward very little on any sort of solution. Because we still have undocumented immigrants in this country. They still have, and they have even less rights than they did before because of the Trump administration and the Biden administration's continuation of Trump-era policies. And that lack of rights makes them more easily exploitable. Because when you have, when your boss, instead of, it's already incredibly difficult to organize, right? It's already incredibly difficult to organize, even as just a normal worker, as just somebody who the worst that can happen to you is you get fired. That's a really big deal. Now, what if the worst that can happen to you is you get deported, potentially from the only country that you've ever known to a country where you don't speak the language?
Right, and perhaps your entire family as well.
You get torn away from your family. That is a much bigger consequence. And so, having these rights denied to undocumented people is bad for them, obviously, but it's bad for us because they're more easily exploitable, and it is easier to make them work for next to nothing. It's easier to make them work for no health care, for no benefits, for no retirement, for no workplace protections. And when that happens, when we have lots of workplaces with these terrible working conditions, that does, to a certain extent, bring the standard down for everybody. But the answer to that is not to attack these people. The answer to that is to give these people rights and organize with them to make everybody's life better. That's obviously the answer. This was her closing argument, though. And let's just see if she addresses anything that Max said.
When you come to the United States of America illegally, you are recognizing that what you are getting as a result of being here outweighs the cost of your being here. That's part of the reason you're here, so you can pay remittances back to your home country and all of those types of things. I would say there are plenty of Americans who would like to work. Look at the study from California about Black men who lost their job during COVID, Southern California, and didn't have another job even though they were looking. There are 50 some odd million Americans who are wanting to have a job but cannot. There are ways that ethnic unions, right, led by immigrants, do not hire Black Americans. For example, I don't know about other Americans, probably so, but the reality is you should not be here in the first place. And by being here, you purchase, you do those things where you get taxed. That's the cost of being here without permission and consent illegally.
That was a very weird comment about ethnic unions.
Yeah.
That was very strange.
So, I mean, I think she's one of those people who, stirs up racial and ethnic division as a tactic. And this whole discussion reminds me. I just want to plug a previous guest that we had on the show, Brendan O'Connor. He wrote a book called Blood Red Lines: How Nativism Fuels the Right. It's been on my to-read list since he's been on the show. But really want to just shout that out. If you missed it, it's been, a little over a year, I believe, since we had Brendan on the show. But he really dives into how this nativist thinking has been a huge source of power and influence for the contemporary right. And it's really disappointing that, it's 2022, we're still dealing with this. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about our fellow human beings here. And at no point, really in these conversations, do we ever address the elephant in the room, which is why are people so desperate to risk their lives and limbs, the safety of their families? Why are they so desperate to come here, and despite these dangers? Well, maybe if the United States would stop overthrowing people's governments, maybe if the United States would stop with sanctions that is killing tens of thousands of people, maybe if the United States would stop flooding these countries with arms and backing right-wing militias and having violent drug wars disrupting communities, maybe if people's communities weren't being bulldozed by developers, and maybe if people's livelihoods weren't thrown out the window with free trade agreements, maybe, just maybe, there'd be less people eager to come here.
Right. Yeah, and it really, she made no effort to address anything that Max said about anything. That was really bizarre as a closing statement after what Max said. So, yeah.
And Max gave a real-life example of a union, not an ethnic union, a multi-ethnic union that believes in multi-ethnic solidarity.
That was super weird. That was a super weird comment. And, the way that she said ethnic, now I'm getting a bit, psychoanalytical, and maybe that's not warranted. But, I sensed, a bite to the way that she said ethnic, and I don't know if that's warranted or not, but that was just super weird. That was a weird comment about ethnic unions, and in the context of not addressing, and it is worth mentioning that folks are the worry about giving undocumented immigrants rights and the ability to live here is that it would incentivize other people, and to a certain extent we can say that it would, but we have open borders within the United States, and people who are destitute in, the Black Belt, for instance, in Alabama, don't move to Hawaii, and Hawaii is kind of like the idyllic thing, and there's nothing stopping them from moving to Hawaii.
Theoretically,
except,
right?
Theoretically, yeah. And so why would it be any different for, people in Guatemala or Honduras, wanting to come work in Alabama? The amount of people that are going to want to do that are not going to be, it's not going to be unmanageable.
No, it's not. And let's just remember that border controls tend to be for people, not for capital.
Right. Right. Capital has open borders, but not labor. Yeah, and that's a line that I got from the bit about having open borders and nobody going to Hawaii, from Stephen Robbins' podcast, Redirect. It's really good about immigration law and perspectives. So y'all should check that out.
Absolutely.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.